All right, a preamble. I've never really engaged with the financial diet's content before, but I took a sort of interest in this topic about generational wealth because, broadly speaking, I think everyone can kind of agree that there's a lot of fucking Nepo babies and they suck. They're annoying to deal with and nobody likes them. Let's keep it a buck 50. We're keeping it a buck 50. Nepo babies suck and they are annoying. So I suppose that this video is tackling the actual economic reasonings for as to why generational wealth is as bad as it is. I've talked briefly before about the problems with generational wealth in amongst the black community because of the fact that a lot of black people, due to American slavery, have been never given the opportunity to build generational wealth through their homes, through a lot of other factors, thanks to like redlining, Jim Crow laws, segregation, broadly speaking, and the Reconstruction era was just like a complete utter failure. But this doesn't have to necessarily be only exclusive to black people. Let's be honest here. If you're poor in America and your family's poor in America, it's more or less guaranteed that you're staying poor. Let's be honest here. If you're poor, you're fucked. What's like the George Carlin bit? If what? You're poor, you're fucked. If you're rich, you're good or some shit. Oh no, that's his bit on abortion. Wrong bit. The other one would be like, what? It's a big club and you ain't in it. Talking about like how billionaires have like unfettered access to the vestiges of power. We all know the sort of like point that's being made here. If you're poor in America, yeah, you're pretty fucked. It's gonna be real rough for you in order to be able to sort of like climb out of it. Not that it doesn't happen. It can happen. But this sort of like ways, maybe not ways, it's not correct to say. The sort of means to be able to do that become way harder and way more difficult to succeed when you're impoverished. It's also very poor to be impoverished, by the way. No one ever really talks about that, right? You have bills that you need to pay, like your rent, your electricity, your internet, your car insurance payments, because you need a car in order to be able to get your job. Gas for the car, a lot of stuff you need to pay for when you're poor. Let's not forget that. If you have generational wealth, your parents are willing to sort of help that. And I'm going to probably add a lot of anecdotes because, like, we don't have generational wealth. My family is more of an example of people who managed to rise above through meritocratic means, through working hard and becoming managers in companies, fossil fuel companies mostly in the case of my dad, but the sort of like meritocracy point, broadly speaking, sticks with my family in particular. But let's see, what do we got here? You're being gaslit by generational wealth. That's true.
One thing no one tells you about growing up poor is even if you one day earn good money, you will spend your adulthood feeling completely gaslit by people who obviously grew up wealthy, but genuinely think that they were middle class. Because for people who grew up like
this is true. True. This is real and true. There's so many people who fucking behave like that, and those people are some of the most insufferable fucking motherfuckers. I try not to do that fucking behavior because I come from an upper middle class background. Now, obviously, I'm not like rich or anything. In fact, I've been like dirtling about trying to like find work for like the past, God, like 7 months at this point. Job market out there is rough, man. Not even like, it's probably be 8 months at this point. Oh God, this is wretched. I try not to have like the attitude of like, oh yeah, I kind of like made it all on my own. I'm like so good and epic. I'm gonna be honest. No, not really. I've had a bunch of help from my parents. I've never had to like pay for like student loan payments or anything. I've never had to deal with any of that shit, and I'm thankful for that. Thank God I didn't have to deal with any of that bullshit. But like, you know, I try not to be like, I don't know, snooty about it, entitled about it, or whatever, because I know that like I had definitely had a leg up in comparison to like a lot of other people. Like, is it as good as it could have been? Probably not. Like, you know, in terms of like finding a job, it was always like a struggle for me to find like work and stuff. Like, I mostly with the positions that I got honestly, I just got lucky. Because the job market is just really bad in general. Like, it's really, really tough out there in order to find employment, gainful employment, let's be honest here, due to a lot of like extenuating circumstances, a lot of socioeconomic factors as well. It's tough out there, especially if you're poor. You don't have time to do a lot of this stuff because, generally speaking, you're just in survival mode. You're trying to do everything possible to get like food on the table and try to like you know, be able to pay your bills. Generally speaking, it's tough out there. It's tough out there if you're poor.
Going to summer sleepaway camp or like having international family vacations every year or expecting their parents to help them with a down payment on a house. Like, they really do think that's how people grow up. Like, they think that that's the average American experience. And you'll be at a job earning the exact same amount as that person, and yet your lifestyle will be completely different. And on some level, they'll think that's a you problem. Because the nature of generational wealth and how it filters into a person's life even long after they've left the house is that it creates a kind of invisible force field. And if you've lived in that,
dude, like fucking like pull yourselves up by your bootstrap mentality, people. I fucking like the fucking stupid dumbass like rising grinders and shit like that. Those guys are so fucking stupid and annoying, and they're all incredibly out of touch fucking fart sniffing elitists.
Your whole life, it's almost impossible to imagine a world without it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our March video essay here on the financial diet. And for this month's essay, I want you to meet two women. Their names are Mel and Sophia.
Women.
They're both 40-year-old married women who work in the publishing industry. Because if you've ever seen a rom-com, you know that women only work in publishing, journalism, or an art gallery. And on the surface, Mel and Sophia's lives look almost identical. They work for competing publishing houses, making similar salaries with similar job titles, and yet one struggles way more than the other. Let's start with Mel. She's still paying off student loans at age 40. She's scrimping on each purchase to save a few $100s a month into her 401k. She's dealing with the aftermath of medical neglect in her youth, like her teeth problems and her joint problems. She's paying off a little bit of credit card debt. She and her husband take turns caring for her kindergartner after school in the afternoons because she has to avoid the cost of after-school care. And she lucked into finding a rent-stabilized apartment after many years of unpredictable.
Dude, childcare is so fucking expensive in America. I know that like within Canada, there was like some pretty solid proposals done by Justin Trudeau and the Liberals to sort of try to address some of the problems with childcare, because it also used to be pretty bad in Canada. But there were some pretty good tax credits and proposals that were made by the Liberals to sort of tackle that problem. You know, thanks to the help of the NDP. That was like one of the main demands. That besides like, you know, expansion of healthcare as well. That was also another big part, but that didn't really pan out as well. But it is expensive to take care of children. Like, it really, really is. Like, if people are like constantly wondering about like, you know, why it is like less likely for young people to fucking generally have kids. Kids are fucking expensive, man. Childcare is expensive. Like, education is expensive. Taking care of a kid costs a lot of fucking money, and a lot of young people don't have that fucking money. A lot of them are generally like struggling in broadly speaking, and they're like, you know, you have like all these like dumbass like pro-natalist dumb fucks saying like, dude, just like have kids forehead for like the glory of like the fucking right white race. And it's just like, how, man? I don't have any fucking money. I can barely pay rent. You want me to have a fucking kid, bro? Jesus Christ. Fuck that. Like, try to, like, you know, help me deal with my socioeconomic conditions, and then, you know, maybe I'll think about having a fucking kid. And also, like, taking care of a kid takes a lot of time. People just want to, like, do their own thing and, like, you know, live life to the fullest. And I think that's also, like, pretty valid. If you want to do that, that's your decision, obviously. Like, you know, the kind of, like, idea where it's like, you know, you can have, like, a kid at, like, any time. It's like, I mean, that's technically true, right? You can, right? There's always going to be, like, I don't know, like, surrogacy, or, like, you know, you can freeze, like, sperm, or, like, whatever. There's a ton of different shit you can do, right? But, I mean, if we're talking about, like, you know, reasonings for as to why it's, like, harder than ever to have, like, a kid and stuff, and, like, you know, like, I'm going off on, like, a complete tangent here, but, like, for as to like the reasonings as to why it's like no one's having kids or like whatever, it's not because of like some weird like woke SJW whatever the fuck about like anti-natalism or some shit. Nah, man, kids are expensive, bro. They cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. People don't have got time for that shit, unfortunately, because of socioeconomic factors. It is what it is, you know.
rent increases, a lifesaver since buying property in the city is nowhere within her family's reach. And then sitting just one desk over, you have Sophia, who, as we said, has essentially the same salary, works the same job, but who has no student loans to speak of. She loves going out with her friends at least once a week, plus shopping when the mood strikes. She's healthy and active for her age with no medical concerns. She has no credit card debt, actively racking up miles and points with her cards that she pays.
Yeah, it's also true. That's actually another really good point. Yeah, generally speaking, a lot of poor people don't really like go out and socialize as much as well because, dude, fucking that shit's also expensive. It's just it's just really expensive. Like, God, this like sounds like so somber and fucking terrible to say. It's just expensive to exist. I hope, like, broadly speaking, it's understood what I mean by that. Just to like live and just to like be able to pay for like basic amenities and stuff like that. It's fucking expensive, man. Costs a lot of money.
Is often full each month. She and her husband have a nanny who's available to pick up and babysit their child every day after school, and she lives in what she considers to be a modest 3-bedroom condo on the bottom 2 floors of a brownstone, which she moved into with her husband shortly after they got married. Now, if these women who are both
What the fuck is a brownstone? Whoops. What's a brownstone? What does that mean? Oh, it's a type of townhouse. Oh, like I said, like living in New York or something? I didn't know that. Huh. Those are nice. Neat.
very accomplished and work in this prestigious competitive industry, have such similar salaries, and are the same age, how do their lives look so different? Luck always plays a role in these stories, and we won't discount that. But for Mel and Sophia, and millions of Americans like them, the real answer is generational wealth. But before we get into this month's video essay, here is just a quick word from our sponsor, Betterment. Now that we're fully into tax season, I know that the first thing a lot of us want to hear is another financial to-do that feels like a ton in the form of stocks, real estate, cash, heirlooms, and other holdings. But it can also pass down in much more intangible ways, in our bodies, in our minds, in our social groups, and basically everything in between. And it's important to say that generational wealth is not necessarily a morally bad thing. For example, no one controls the family they're born into, no one chooses to have parents who can give them a down payment for a house. And for most people, it would be hard to stand on their values and not accept that. And for the people passing down that wealth, for most families, that's still the pinnacle of the American dream, to have your children do better than you did. Every day in this community where people come to learn about money and
I think like in terms of like generational wealth, I think like a bunch of people, like one of my buddies, she works as like a nurse in like the hospital. It's like not too far from my house. Her parents helped her buy her apartment, right? She like, you know, put down a down payment for it, pays a mortgage on it and shit. Her parents, she made a deal with her parents like to help her fucking do that shit, right? Like, cause you know she wanted to be closer to her work and shit. It was more convenient for her and whatnot. I feel like this is like the video gets into this, but this is like something that's becoming more and more common. Like, you know, like there's like a statistic out there about like how Gen Z is kind of becoming more obsessed with like making money, and broadly speaking, this is why like no one wants to be like dependent, I guess, on their parents anymore. I suppose they want to have like some form of like independence for themselves, right? Broadly speaking, because like I said before, it's rough out there, man. It's not easy being like living on your own and shit, right? Like you always need to have like the broader society at this point has been like more or less built around the idea that you need to have like you know, two people earning like a sustainable fucking income in order to be able to afford like rent and be able to like live in certain locations and stuff. It's just kind of sad, you know.
And get better with it. A primary reason for wanting to be better with money is so that their children will not have to struggle the way they did. Although when it comes to the higher levels of generational wealth, they should definitely be taxed more, but we'll get into that later. But all of that to say, even if generational wealth is not inherently a bad thing, it is still a very unfair thing. And the way that it filters into our lives many years after we've left our parents' home makes it so that we're kind of low-key being gaslit all the time because we're told that we're all playing with the same equipment and on the same field, but babe, we're not even playing the same sport. So to get a better understanding of how Mel and Sophia ended up so differently despite literally working next to each other at the same office with the same salary, we have to take a step back to see how they got there. Let's start again with Mel. She grew up in a working class family in upstate New York. She attended all public schools, most of which were pretty underfunded, but she still finished high school with a 3.8 GPA, taking the only 2 AP classes available to her. She spent 2 years attending community college before transferring to a well-regarded 4-year state school to finish her degree. She met and married her similarly working class husband at community college, and she and her husband are now finally able to contribute to their 401ks consistently, which was a huge financial goal of theirs, but between lingering student loan debt, credit card debt, and paying for childcare, they don't have a ton left over to save each month. When times have gotten tough, they've occasionally had to dip into their credit cards past what they can pay off, leading to a cycle of small consumer debt. As the highest earner in her family, she's also responsible for sending money to her parents every month to help subsidize their living expenses. Whereas her coworker Sophia grew up in a wealthy family in Westchester, an upper-class New York City suburb. She attended prep school and finished high school also with a 3.8 GPA, taking almost all AP classes for her junior and senior year. Her high school extracurriculars were the fencing team, the student council VP, yearbook committee, school newspaper, and summers attending an 8-week-long summer camp in New Hampshire. Her GPA was inflated thanks to AP class grading scales, so through a combination of academics, extracurriculars, and family connections, she was able to attend Brown University, where she landed a spot on the fencing team, where she met and married a similarly affluent man at the Ivy League school. Now, since her parents gifted her and her husband a sizable down payment for their condo as a wedding gift, her mortgage payments have always been manageable, and her husband have investments well beyond their maxed out 401ks. When she got into a little credit card debt as a 20-something, her parents paid it off while she reimbursed them, so she didn't get hit with interest. And her parents have plenty of resources, so she'll never be responsible for their care or retirement. Now, it's clear that Sophia's background has made it infinitely easier for her to achieve the same position in life as Mel, despite them having, by all measures, pretty equal qualifications in things like academics, skills, and work ethic. And at the end of the day, it's all about
yeah, and it's kind of like this plays into the thing that I was saying earlier about like the Reconstruction era, because like the same opportunities have not been like afforded to like minority populations, broadly speaking, within the US. They've always had to like basically struggle for like any of their sort of position. I think the video also gets into like the predisposition sort of like minority populations in terms of like how hard it is for them in order to be able to like build any sort of generational wealth, because they've never really had an opportunity. And America is like very, very dependent on generational wealth being built, like quite literally. That's like it's the main way for like wealth to be accumulated, broadly speaking, is through, well, housing. Very, like, we all know the meme of like the boomer in their fucking house that they've had since like the fucking 50s, that they've paid down like forever ago, still accumulating and accruing a ton of value. Right, we broadly speaking, we know about like these sort of like assets that like home ownership sort of brings within like the broader like American sort of economy. Yeah, we'll just say it's the broader sort of like American economy.
About the pipelines that generational wealth creates, from who our parents know, to where we go to school, to who we marry, to how we get our jobs, to how we buy a home. To hear personal accounts of the realities of growing up without the boon of generational wealth, we spoke with two women who were able to change their circumstances after growing up in low to middle income families without generational wealth. Paola, 31, and Sarah, 29.
Growing up, my family's financial situation was definitely what I would call paycheck to paycheck. Looking at myself now, I'm not at that point. I definitely feel that I at least accomplished financial freedom. If something were to happen to my job, if I needed to drop something for family, or support family in any way, I feel confident that I'm able to do that without sacrificing what life I've currently built. But yeah, growing up, I do remember times of like, we had everything we needed. We never had enough to splurge on things, right? Like, we had enough money for our meals, like our 3 meals a day. We didn't like splurge on like snack stuff like that. When it came time for birthdays, Christmas, I do remember my dad occasionally getting a second job just to kind of give us what they thought, we deserved, but they just weren't able to provide with what jobs they had at the time.
My financial situation growing up was very much middle of the road, middle class family. If you can imagine a 1-story house in the suburbs, mom, dad, 3 kids. Both of my parents worked growing up. My dad was an airplane mechanic, and my mom's an accountant. And so really growing up, we had nothing that we ever kind of went without, which was really a privilege. So all of the kids are very much involved in different after school activities. We never kind of went and had a summer that we were terribly bored or something. We were very much supported growing up. And from the outside looking in, that felt very stable, very, comfortable. But from the inside, even though I was very young and it was hard to really see or understand all of the financial background and concepts, you just felt the stress, or maybe the tension around money between, the parents and planning and making sure that their kids were supported for. We didn't talk about finance a lot, so it was kind of a black box of information where you don't know what is going on or all the words that are being used, but you just felt.
Oh, it's really interesting because this is like also a fucking thing that constantly happens. It's mostly with like white people. I've noticed. A lot of like white people just do not like talking about, like, there's like, it's like 2 things: finances, and also like who they voted for, which is really, really funny, or like whatever political predilections that they have. Is a broader pattern that I have noticed. Like, a lot of like younger generations don't really have this problem as much, to be honest. They tend to be a lot more open about that stuff. Older generations, not so much, which I find, like, I'm not really sure like why this sort of attitude developed. I mean, maybe like, byproduct of the 50s and its consequences, rearing their ugly heads yet again. That's probably, I don't know, that's something on there. Because I feel like it's good to be open about stuff like this. So I don't know, like, these 2 women have given their case. Oh, I was upper middle class. Initially, I am an immigrant. I came from Romania. Not that long after the revolution, that deposed Ceausescu, about like 9 years after. My parents wanted to come to Canada because they wanted to have a better life for me in comparison to Romania, which is a shithole. Which is true. It is a shithole. But there's a lot of like complicated reasonings for as to why Romania is a fucking shithole. Not necessarily a lot of it is Romania's fault, but yeah, well, Romania do begin the very, very much so short end of the stick kind of a deal, but well, what can you do? It's one of those like situations where it's like, it's just kind of unfortunate that dependent on like where you're, like, quite literally, like in America, I'm kind of like going off topic here. Yeah, like, depending on the zip code, you kind of also like have a pretty good idea about like the background that someone has, and I think that's just kind of bad. That's just kind of sad, because Why is that the case? Well, because of a lot of like ridiculous, goofy policies. We probably mentioned them already, like the redlining, failure of Reconstruction. I'm talking about like a lot of minority populations, America broadly speaking being quite racist, but sort of my family was able to like rise up out of poverty through their own meritocratic means. Obviously, we've like had times where we struggled, like whenever my dad wasn't able to find a job, we were struggling. We had problems because he was having troubles like finding a new contract or whatever, or like my mother not being able to pay enough or not earning enough because of like she works in engineering. Both of them work in engineering, and because of, broadly speaking, a lot of sexism that exists within those industries, it can be sometimes quite difficult to, for her to get like better positions because of misogyny that broadly exists because of like the sort of patriarchal nature that exists in a lot of STEM fields. We've gone through like spiels like this before. We kind of like managed to get out, I suppose, through our own meritocratic means, I guess, for like lack of a better term. We are like perfect examples of meritocracy. But I will say that we were probably overall quite lucky. Like we probably just like struck it out, got lucky somewhere. I'm not really sure where. Like I'd have to like go over like some history of my family in order to figure that out. But I'm trying to think like what other point was like I trying to raise here exactly. I don't remember. Yeah, I don't really remember actually.
Okay, parents are stressed, whether that is conversations about going to college. There was never an expectation of, oh yes, we have this, secret bank account that is going to just make sure you are comfortable through college. It was always a conversation of, I don't know where we're going to find this. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. So,
oh yeah, my parents started saving for my college ever since like they came to Canada. So when I was like the first time they were earning some extra income from my dad's work, the first thing they started investing in was college, or not college, university.
So though we never had to make huge sacrifices in terms of, yes, I was able to go to college. Yes, I was able to do all of the activities that I wanted to do, and all the experiential learning things that I was excited about. It was always a conversation of, we need to figure out how to do this because it's not going to be easy financially.
But let's look beyond just the pure numbers of generational wealth and really unpack how it gaslights all of us in real time. Starting with chapter 1, the privilege of being a kid. As we discussed in a previous video essay about the lingering effects of poverty, there are many ways that growing up without much continues to be visible and punishable well into adulthood. While it is definitely possible to change class, and I again am an example of that, the truth is that having grown up poor does tend to radiate throughout many aspects of our lives. And we live in a society that continually tries to remind us of where we came from, because ultimately having poor people is of huge economic benefit. Everything from our psychological and physical health to our aesthetic appearance and presentation to our social and cultural norms and habits are deeply impacted by the class in which we grew up. And although America often likes to imagine itself a classless society, we go pretty far out of our way to make sure that if you grew up a certain way, it is very hard to make people forget. But before we
1000%. This is a great point. I mean, this is a broader sort of like thing with capitalism in general, right? Like, for the capitalists to be able to exploit the population, there must always be a permanent underclass, right? Oh, there always has to be one, kind of a deal, right? So that's more or less like the point that's being like, if we want to do like the basic sort of tenets of like Marxist analysis, which is why like America broadly speaking did a lot of the sort of policies that they did, and like the failures of Reconstruction, a bunch of other stuff that I was mentioning earlier. It was to make sure that there would always at all times a permanent underclass for capitalists to exploit, right? Like immigrants or minority populations. This can even extend to a lot of like poor white people as well. Like I don't think even they should be really excluded out of that, because there's a lot of like classism broadly speaking that exists within America. Like I don't think that's like ridiculous to say, but yeah, the idea that like America's like framed as like this perfect sort of like like classless society, like they pretend to do that. I find that to be very, very funny, to be honest.
We can get into the long-term effects of being low income. Let's start by understanding why there are so many poor people in America to begin with, and why they stay poor for so long. Because FYI, as of today, there are about 42 million people living below the poverty line in America. And whether we're talking about having messed up teeth from never getting braces, the stigma attached to obesity, which is heavily conflated with socioeconomic status, particularly in youth, regional accents, a lack of cultural knowledge from things like travel or elite educations, or simply the absence of social connections and manners favored by the wealthy, being poor is something that follows you around as you age. In fact, there are even studies that show that we can literally tell people's socioeconomic status just from looking at their face. And this is not to say that these things are distinct from the actual financial element of generational wealth. Even if you never got braces or didn't look rich or didn't have good manners, having parents who can give you hundreds of thousands of dollars as an adult to get into a housing market is still a huge advantage. But it means that much of the wealth gap is more insidious than just money. And this is why it often feels like we're being gaslit about wealth and its effects. Because not only are many of its most classic markers intentionally hidden, like it's rare that adults will just volunteer the fact that their parents bought them a house or paid for all of their college or subsidized their childcare, but many of these clear class markers that we pick up in childhood, people don't even ascribe to class.
In fact, the subtle visual language of wealth, especially generational wealth, is so pervasive that it largely explains the recent explosion in cultural fascination with old money style or quiet luxury, especially from people who largely can't be affording either, as we said in a video on the topic.
And this style has simply exploded in popularity on social media over the past few years, and especially in the past 12 months, to the extent that basically every influencer and fashion magazine has created their own guide to the style or has demonstrated their own spin on it. And even on social media, it tends to vary between people who actually might embody that lifestyle themselves.
Oh god, I can only imagine how potentially fucking insufferable those fucking people probably are. Jesus Christ. But yeah, you know, it's like sort of like I guess like a numbing of the pain, quote unquote, I suppose. I find it really funny because I've had this take before, you know, that history, you know, the funny thing about history is that very often it does not rhyme or does not repeat, but it likes to rhyme very, very often. And we all know about, like, in the 1920s, like, the sort of, like, old money people versus, like, the new money people. Like, if you, like, took a bunch of history classes for talking about, like, the Great Depression, that's, like, a topic that gets, like, broadly covered, you know, the idea that, like, you know, we had, like, all these people who were, like, sort of like a commentary on, like, generational wealth and shit like that. Like, you know, there used to always be all these people with who had a lot of money. They were always, like, really rich and shit like that. You know, probably, I think if people can you can sort of, like, pick up what I'm putting down here.
Giving glimpses into their life to people who are trying to recreate the aesthetic through primarily things like fast fashion clothes, which is obviously in many ways the worst of both worlds. But the fact that it's so popular now does seem to feel somewhat in line with the extent to which younger generations are increasingly removed from any semblance of financial stability or security, let alone exorbitant wealth. The average person is never even going to come in contact with the kind of people who can afford to wear subtle, discreet designer wardrobes that they can treat like garbage while they pull into their slip at their yacht club with the schooner that's been in their family for decades. Unless, of course, like my former self, they happen to be working for them. But it makes total sense that as we get further and further away from these ideals, we become more and more fascinated with them. But when you really break it down, many of the privileges of generational wealth that manifest in childhood and then the transition into adulthood are simply the luxury of being a child, and then having an unburdened transition into your adult years where you can afford to take your time, change your mind, make mistakes. So you could say that one of the biggest advantages of wealth as a kid is literally just learning to be a kid. Quote, young adults from poor families establish financial independence early, e.g. contributing to family bills during adolescence, considering themselves fully responsible for their finances as young adults, whereas young adults from more affluent homes are more likely to receive financial transfers from their parents, who often help them pay for college and other expenses. These findings highlight the ways in which socioeconomic inequality in childhood can differentiate youth's experiences of adolescence and young adulthood. Increased investment in higher education accompanied by delayed marriage and childbearing combine to create an extended period in which young adults experiment with different relationships and slowly settle into adult roles. Securing good jobs is also difficult for young workers, particularly those who do not invest in higher education. This emerging adulthood research literature suggests—
Yeah, because again, like was mentioned earlier, fucking education, well, especially in America, broadly speaking in the West, costs a lot of fucking money. You know, we could thank Lee Atwater for that shit when he was talking about, like, you know, the people within the hippie movement becoming an educated proletariat, and as a result, like, there was a lot of defunding of education that happened under Reagan as a result, right? Like, we understand the sort of history, like the sort of fall of like American education, why like educational outcomes in America are becoming worse. Well, I mean, it's also that and No Child Left Behind. Thanks Bush. Very cool. We love George Bush. He's one of my favorite guys. Very good. But you know, it's also like it's also like it's a wealth gap thing at this point as well, which is just kind of bad. It's sad. You know, it's harder and harder to be poor out there because you're not gonna get, like, if you don't get like a education, you don't get like a degree or anything, it becomes like 10 times more difficult to be able to get like a good paying job.
that the majority of youth benefit from large parental investments during this elongated transition to adulthood, yet there is a significant variation by social class, with a discernible subgroup of adults and young adults who may lack the resources or have parents who lack the resources to support an elongated transition to adulthood. And as I stated in my TikTok, many of these hallmarks of what it means to live a relatively carefree childhood or have a long transition into adulthood, things like traveling, extracurricular activities, not having to work, going to college, and even to graduate school, are treated not as the class signifiers they are, but as just normal aspects of growing up, which, as any kid who grew up poor can tell you, is very much not normal for not everyone, but literally the vast majority of Americans.
I know that a lot of people think about, I want to go.
Yeah, because a bit of an anecdote here. I went to a private school. I would probably say that I myself was basically like amongst all those private school kids, because a lot of them were like part of like the fucking billion-dollar companies and shit, like families with like billion-dollar fucking companies and shit like that that worked in like the local area. I was definitely like amongst these sort of like, I don't know, people there. I was definitely the poorest, or one of the poorest, but maybe not the poorest, but definitely the poor. Like, Quite literally, like, one of my buddies was like slated to become a fucking, and this is like no fucking cap, like a prince of Persia. Quite literally was about to be a prince of Iran, back during the days of like the Shah and shit. Is fucking crazy. It, sort of like to talk about like the sort of like people that used to like go to like my private school, and I mean those guys have basically like never struggled in life and were able to become like have successful careers, unlike me, who got fucked over by a lot of extenuating circumstances. Let's go.
Go to a really well-known college, Ivy League, whatever it is, to really set myself up for great opportunities. I actually did the opposite. Whenever I was going to my undergraduate, I actually decided to just go to the small university that was 20 minutes from my house. I saved on room and board. I stayed at home. I was still able to support in bills with the student worker jobs that I had, but that university provided me the most amount of scholarships. I literally based my decisions around who can support me the most in the journey, so that I wasn't digging a hole for myself from the very beginning. So that's what I kept in mind. I'm like, what can help me earn more money, but then also who can help me like get there without, you know, kind of like digging a hole for myself. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't coming out with more debt than what my parents had like helped us get to.
But part of the reason that this very specific view of what it means to be a child, teenager, and then adult is perpetuated in our society, and anyone who didn't live that way is looked at as the weird one, is because the people.
I'm so glad that I didn't have to fucking deal with student loan debt, dude. Jesus Christ, I can only like imagine. My buddy, my old roommate, he had to deal with student loan debt, and I think he like came up with like a financial plan to like basically pay that shit off like as soon as possible. Like it's crazy. I think he's almost done paying it off.
Who are deciding what our culture looks like, from executives in office buildings to the people writing in newspapers and hosting shows on TV to the politicians who decide laws, are generally speaking mostly from these more elite social classes. And if there's one period in life in which this perception of generational wealth is turned into just how everyone lives, it is at elite colleges and universities. Which brings us to chapter 2, college, affirmative action for rich kids. In all of the enlightening, and I use that word very loosely, recent conversations about DEI and affirmative action, especially after SCOTUS's anti-affirmative action ruling a few years ago, there is one very clear method of affirmative action that I for one haven't seen mentioned: the elite college conveyor belt.
In college, I basically thought that no one has money for college. Everyone goes in and just digs themselves a lovely little hole of student debt, and I thought it was the expectation that no college would allow you to attend unless you could fully finance your experience with debt. So
that's actually fucking crazy that is the sort of mentality that's like sort of embraced, broadly speaking. I feel like that's just kind of wretched. I don't know. I have a fucking problem with that, to be honest. That is the sort of like perception that is maintained with like college, because I feel like that shouldn't be really the case, you know? Like, why is that the case? Why does it have to be this way? Well, we know who we can blame. We blame like fucking Reagan for that shit. Like, really, in reality, he's the one. That's the motherfucker who's at fault for this kind of a shit. Let's be fucking honest here. That bastard Ronald Reagan.
I never had a stress, but it was because I was not well informed about how to complete college in a financially responsible way. So every time I filled out the FAFSA and I just said yes, maximum loans of whatever, I didn't know the difference between subsidized or unsubsidized because I was just taking whatever was offered. And though I had that, I still throughout college had 2 jobs, 2 on-campus jobs always. And that was an expectation to be able to pay rent, buy groceries. I was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities that cost a lot of money, so I wanted to not cut myself short on those experiences. So being able to afford that was still difficult at sometimes, because having 2 jobs and then wanting to still fully participate in whatever clubs or kind of outside classroom things was still something I wanted to pursue and was not going to cut out of my experience.
Now, despite what politicians and pundits on the right want you to believe, kids from wealthy families are much more likely to have an unfair advantage getting into top universities than minorities or disadvantaged kids. From 2017 article on CNBC, quote, at 38...
Dude, the fucking, all the stupid affirmative action fucking, like, complete utter bunk and conspiracism that the right love to soy the fuck out over, it's like, no, this is not true. Like, affirmative action is an attempt to sort of, like, do something about the fact that, you know, the current, like, college sort of experience is as unfair as it is for rich kids in comparison to a lot of, like, poorer kids, because this is also a problem that, you know, is meant to sort of be, like... I'm trying to think of what the term is. It's supposed to, like, try to hit 2 birds with one stone, because the people who tend to be a lot poorer tend to be like minorities and immigrants and stuff like that, generally speaking, right? Like, we've already talked about like the failures of Reconstruction and the like attempts of putting in policies to help Black people be able to try to build some form of generational wealth, how that was like a complete failure. It got like dismantled basically by racist Southern Democrats because of like, I don't know, like attempted building bipartisanship by like Abraham Lincoln with I'm trying to remember who the fuck was like Lincoln's fucking vice president at the time during the Civil War. He was like some fucking like Southern Democrat, some fucking dumbass racist or some shit, right? And you know, obviously when Lincoln got assassinated, that guy went into fucking power immediately after Lincoln got killed by, you know, another fucking, well, Confederate. Very cool, very good, you know, fantastic, excellent. We love the Confederates, folks, don't we? We have such appreciation for the South, don't we, folks? That dude basically like nipped that fucking shit in the bud as quickly as he fucking could, right? Like we all know about the broader failures of like Reconstruction. We've seen this before, right? Like it's way harder for it, and like we're seeing the byproducts of it, right? Play out to this day right now, right? Like it's way harder if you're fucking poorer, like to be able to get into colleges and universities, to be able to have like a fair meritocratic chance, you know, for all the like soying out that these like a lot of these like fucking dipshits do, like saying like, oh bro, like America's like the shining city on the hill, like if you work hard, you do everything you can, you too can also make it. When that's just not the case, right? Like if you're like money is the main thing that fucking talks in America. Anyone with like half a brain can, broadly speaking, like agree with that position. Like to say otherwise is like complete nonsense, right?
Colleges in America, including 5 in the Ivy League, more students came from the top 1% of the income scale than from the entire bottom 60%. It also points out that at every one of the top 65 U.S. universities, the median parent income is over $100,000. That figure ranges from $272,000 at Washington University in St. Louis to $104,900 at UCLA. Reading that stat makes me lol because in my hometown there was like an extremely elite Montessori school that was like a feeder school into a lot of elite colleges, and I remember a lot of them would always go to Washington University in St. Louis, and I was like, what is going on? What is this random ass school I've never heard of when the rest of them are going to like, you know, Dartmouth and Princeton and everything? Turns out a lot of rich kids go to that school. My producer here, whose family's from St. Louis and has spent significant time there, is informing me in real time that it's a beautiful campus.
But also, like, I don't understand anybody paying that much money to go to school in St. Louis.
The St. Louis hater has logged on. I will let the what do you call people that live in St. Louis? St. Louisians? Do you call people who live St. Louisans? Anyway, St. Louisans, sound off in the chat what do we think about Washington University of St. Louis. The point is, if a student's family is wealthy enough and they want their kid to go to college, which is basically always the case, they can always make that happen. Quote, in one famous instance, resurfaced this week by Vox and originally put forward.
And that's literally like, you know, I'm anecdote Andy here again, you know. That's quite literally the sort of mentality that my parents had, but like my parents basically tried to approach it with like, yeah, we don't want you to have to deal with like student loan debt because we know of like the horror stories of it, right? Which is, like I said before, it's kind of like sad that this is the case. Like, it's just like, you know, student loans are just so like complete ass and just ass backwards, complete dog shit that it's just like, well, we have to do everything possible to make it like such that like this sort of condition that was sort of like made by, well, Ronald Reagan, because colleges and universities in America used to be pretty inexpensive, right? Like if you had a job, a part-time fucking job, we all know like the story and the meme of like you know, 1950s and its consequences rearing their ugly heads yet again. We broadly speaking, we know about like how easy it was, or I don't know if easy is the correct term. I don't think easy is the correct term, about how much like much less difficult it was, broadly speaking, for colleges and universities to be affordable, because they used to be like heavily fucking subsidized by the American federal government, and that shit got taken away by Reagan. So you know, Reagan and Nixon. Nixon also had a part to play in that as well. So you know, whoa, conservatives out here making your life fucking worse because again they're scared of you getting fucking educated, because broadly speaking, conservatives know that if people start to get educated, they're not gonna fucking vote conservative anymore. Like, broadly speaking, we can have a pretty good understanding for as to why the right wing is as anti-intellectual as it always has been, right? Because they know that education is the death of them as a political movement. But you know, it becomes like, you know, a lot harder for a lot of poor people in order to be able to sort of like recognize their like sort of class station, I guess, for lack of a better term, because of, well, just how difficult it is to be able to earn a fucking living. It's just sad. And not to mention be able to build their own like generational wealth and shit as well.
In Daniel Golden's 2007 book, The Price of Admission, Jared Kushner's wealthy father pulled every string he could reach to get his son into Harvard. He called 2 senators to whom he had donated to have them call the Ivy League school on his son's behalf, and he directly pledged a gift of $2.5 million. On his own merits, Jared would not have gotten in.
Dude, I'll be honest, like I never had my fucking parents be able to do shit like that. That's fucking crazy. But that's only like reserved for like the really fucking rich and wealthy, you know, like the Jared Kushners of the world, right? That fucking family is filled with a bunch of fucking dumbass rich people, right? Like, no one else can ever get a privilege like that. That's crazy. That's you know, byproducts of having billionaire families and shit like that. You know, they get fucking strings pulled for you. And this is like the sort of like point that like Bernie Sanders raises a lot with like the oligarchy tour, right? Why it's like, broadly speaking, it's that one Princeton study saying like, yeah, like, this isn't a meritocratic society that the U.S. currently exists under. It's oligarchy. This is what it looks like. It's shit like that. But, you know.
Since he lacked both the top grades and the SAT scores. We can also just look at the celebrity college admission scandal to see how this plays out with people who are arguably slightly less nefarious than Jared Kushner's father. Although didn't Felicity Huffman end up having to spend a little time in the clink for this? And according to one 2023 study by Raj Chetty and David D. Deming of Harvard University and John Friedman of Brown University, further confirms the advantage rich kids have in elite college admissions. Quote, the economists find that wealthy children, even when they have comparable SAT and ACT scores to less affluent kids, are much more likely to get into these elite schools. A student from the richest 1% of American families, i.e. earning over $611,000 per year, is twice as likely to attend an elite private college as a middle-class student from a family earning between $83,000 and $116,000 a year with the same academic credentials. And the study found that
that's true, because they probably see it as like, you know, oh, we know our tuition's like super expensive and shit. We don't think that these middle class like families are going to be able to pay that shit. So we're just going to let the rich kids in more likely because they can probably fucking pay for it, right? That's why. It's actually just so fucking gross, dude. It's so fucking bad.
legacy kids only had an advantage over other students with similar credentials at schools where they were legacies, and that the advantage didn't always transfer to other elite schools, meaning that they were not, in fact, standout applicants on their own merit. And the study also found that rich kids are more likely to have a resume padded with impressive extracurriculars than middle or working class kids with similar academics. And this is where we take it back to our friend Sophia, who shows us just how important it can be to have things like elite athletics on your resume to compensate for things like being a dum-dum. I'm kidding, she wasn't a dum-dum in this story, but you know, if your parents can pay for you to become an elite level fencer as a teenager, you're probably gonna do okay. And by the way, the sports advantage in college admissions is actually most significant for, you guessed it, white students. Quote, a University of California Riverside study cites research that found 43% of Harvard white students were admitted through what researchers termed an ALDC status, athletic, legacy, dean's preferences, and children of faculty, between 2014 and 2019, and that 3/4 of these students would have been rejected without their ALDC status. Comparatively, less than 16% of Harvard's Black, Asian, and Latino students were ALDC students. Sports admissions generally leave behind economically disadvantaged students, especially those from inner cities. While college football and basketball garner the most media attention, elite universities also fill the rosters of golf, fencing, crew, tennis, and lacrosse teams, among other country club sports. And these sports are mostly fostered in private prep schools or public schools in predominantly white and wealthy school districts. And it's important to note that even if Mel's crappy public school did for some reason offer fencing or crew, she wouldn't have had time to become really, really good at those sports because she had to work a job, which is the case for many middle and lower income students.
I felt a difference.
Is that, oh, so that's why, like, the fucking meme, I don't know if it's like a fucking meme or something, like the idea that basically for, like, I don't know, like, black people to get out of their sort of, like, more impoverished positions, I guess, for lack of a better term, generally speaking, the only way they could do it is, like this is, like, something, like, that's, like, said in, like, rap songs and shit like that, is, like, the only way they have, like, a chance of being able to sort of, like, get out and, like, from, like, I don't know, like, the hood or the projects or, like, the whatever the predisposition they find themselves in is either to be, like, just, like, I don't know, to quote unquote, I guess, like, dance for the white man, I suppose, for, like, lack of a better term. It feels bad, man, dude.
Of financial responsibility, but it was a slow creep because eventually my first year I just assumed everybody is here via debt, and then I did join a sorority, and so you have the full experience of students who are on full ride scholarships at college who are in this a sorority. You have me who has to work 2 jobs, and then eventually you have people who are fully supported by their parents. They don't have to have jobs while they're in school. They feel comfortable. They're from an outsider's perspective, oh, they're going to get food more than I am. So then I felt like I saw the discrepancies between the people who have a lot more financial stability and people who do not at that time. Whether that is accurate or not, again, I don't know, because somebody might have looked at me and thought, oh, Sarah gets whatever. She would, like, she's in this very expensive sorority that costs a lot of money that she doesn't have to spend in order to graduate from college. So I guess it's all public perception of
sororities.
Kind of the responsibility that I felt. A lot of that I put on myself. I didn't feel comfortable asking my parents for extra money for this, extra money for that. Hey, groceries are really tight this week. I tried to keep it all very to myself because I knew and I still had that understanding that, oh, parents are stressed at home about money. I do not want to be, the kid that was always asking for money, grocery money, laundry money. So I just tried to kind of push through in that sense. So the pressures that I was feeling or expectations were a lot of self-imposed.
And it's also worth noting that generational wealth doesn't just get you into colleges disproportionately, especially the elite ones. It also makes you vastly less likely to graduate with student loans, which completely changes your adult finances. Because some people's experience of what generational wealth means only really comes in the form of having their college tuition paid for, but even this gives them a huge leg up financially. Quote, a recent study showed that Americans making student loan payments have up to 36% less saved for retirement compared to those without such debt. Additionally, nearly half of millennial and Gen Z retirement investors surveyed say that they've dipped into their retirement savings to cover expenses, with student loans being the leading culprit. Basically, not having debt doesn't just mean not having this burden to pay back every month. It means being able to take advantage of long-term wealth building a lot sooner. If you're able to invest more aggressively right out of school, that means that your investment will will have a ton more time to mature and enjoy that compound interest, for which the major ingredient is just a longer time to do it. And the value of these educations is not just limited to the degrees that you can get or the academic status they confer you, or even whether or not you graduate debt-free. It's also about the people you meet there. And that means everyone from future potential employers to your literal spouse. Which brings us to the next chapter.
True.
Chapter 3, the cost of making connections. When it comes to getting a job, especially at the entry level, getting your foot in the
Dude, this is the shit that fucked me over the most, is fucking, like, connections and shit like that. That's the thing that basically euchred me, for, well, by lack of a better term, I'm gonna be honest. Because, like, if you don't know people, especially in, like, the IT sort of, like, not district, but in, like, the IT sector or whatever, if you don't know people, you're basically fucking cooked. Like, I'll be honest. Like, there are instances where you get lucky if you're, like, real good at the fucking job and stuff like that, but if you don't know people, like, good luck. Good luck getting anything. Or, like, also if you, don't do, like, a co-op or anything as well. That's also, like, another problem.
The door is very often a case of just knowing the right person, which tends to be easier for people who come from generational wealth. And one thing that makes wealth accumulate and perpetuate in circles is the fact that they often become de facto professional, social, and...
Like, yeah, keep in mind, I'm not, like, operating with, like, generational wealth. Like I've said before, like, a generational wealth, me? Nah. I don't have that shit. like I said before, where my family came from, we're immigrants that fled a former Warsaw Pact country. So, I don't know if fled is, like, correct to say here. We left a former Warsaw Pact country.
Romantic circles. For example, the iconic scene from Sex and the City where the women are reading through the New York Times wedding announcements is just as true today as it was then.
You know who those women married? The Roman numeral guys. Charles Duffy Anderson IV. Ding, ding, ding.
Making connections is by far the most important work of the wealthy, and often this happens through mergers of family and romance, whose father knows whom, and who married into which dynasty. By the way, much conversation has been had about why Big married Natasha and not Carrie. We could unpack this for years, and yes, there are multiple reasons, but the number one is that Natasha is from his social class. Carrie's a brokey with a shopping addiction who writes a sex column and lives in a ramshackle apartment. Natasha's the kind of woman who gets you printed in the New York Times wedding section. And when it comes to our careers, according to recruiting firm Robert Walters, personal connections almost always help with the job search, and especially for the already wealthy. Quote, nearly 4 in 5 employers prioritize personal connections over skill sets when making hiring decisions, with 68% of highly qualified candidates being overlooked in favor of those with better personal connections or networks. According to a recent survey into DEI in the workplace, just 29% of employers said that they value a candidate's qualifications and skills in equal measure to the people they know. This type of judgment...
God, fucking trying to explain this to fucking boomers is the most fucking annoying shit on the fucking planet, dude. Because, again, I've even said this before. It's not about, like, meritocracy or whatever. That's a bunch of fucking hoo-ha-ha, okay? That's bullshit. Complete fucking nonsense. No, like, is your dumbass, like, do you know a fucking bunch of people? Okay, cool. Then you're fucking Gucci, bro. Otherwise, like, your goofy ass is fucking, your ass is fucking grass, bro. Like, quite literally. Like, you're never gonna get anywhere if you don't fucking have the sort of, like, people to know. Because I literally also, myself, I went through the whole fucking circuit of, like, career stuff. I sent, like, a ton of fucking resumes. Like, did I get fucking callbacks from, like, a bunch of, like, really esteemed, like, networking and, like, IT companies? Fuck no. I didn't get shit, dude. I got, like, 2 calls for 2 different, like, government positions. One of the interviews just did not work out very well, and the other one, I fumbled. I will admit, I fucking fumbled the other interview, but, like, it just did not fucking work, dude. It didn't work. And so I got, like, basically fucked over. Like, I'm never gonna I've like come to terms with this. I'm probably never finding a good fucking job. Fuck no. I'm fucking euchred, dude.
Impacts employees significantly. 62% feel as though their progression opportunities are hindered even though their skills or output qualify them for a promotion. 70% of employers admit that their personal relationships also influence promotion decisions, with just 11% saying that they have measures in place to prevent workplace nepotism. The study reveals a stark gap in career advancement between the classes. Upper class professionals have a 71% higher chance of getting a promotion than
I love
working class counterparts.
nepotism.
And they also have a clearer vision of how to climb the career ladder, while 70% more working class professionals are unsure of what they need to do to progress. And coming from a family with an established corporate presence isn't just valuable in terms of who they know or the financial benefits they offer. They literally teach you the norms, culture, and language of corporate life before you're even out of high school. So much of being professional is all about these subtle unspoken codes.
God, that's like hits the nail on the head for like so many minorities and fucking immigrants, dude, right? I'm an immigrant, right? A lot of like the time my parents had problems trying to find work because like they never would have considered like a lot of like employers didn't really consider a lot of the stuff, a lot of the credentials that my parents had, because of the fact that, again, like I said, we were from a Warsaw Pact country, Romania, like. And we came into Canada, like, about a decade after, well, Romania was no longer communist. So, you know, We basically just got like completely fucking euchred because of that. There was a lot. Well, I basically got fucking euchred because of that, because I don't have like any of these connections and like corporate sort of, I don't know, like conglomerates or whatever. I basically have to start from scratch.
Most of which you wouldn't even learn at college unless you already happen to be surrounded by people who'd mastered them.
Thinking about my early job search, I definitely didn't rely on any connections. The field I wanted to go into at the time was communications, and nobody in my family like had any connections in that. And really, in the U.S., it's just me, my parents, my sister, and that was the family that we had to rely on. And even just thinking about the, where I grew up, it was like a smaller town, and to really be able to make more money in that field, I would have to be looking for jobs in the city. So I really just relied on applying, making sure that I had a great cover letter, but outside of that, that networking aspect, never knew about that until like a couple jobs into my career. I
always knew about like the networking aspect, but basically my strategy was just shotgun a bunch of fucking goddamn resumes and, just, I don't know, just get fucking lucky, forehead. I'll be quite honest. It fucking sucks, man, to have to like say that this is like the fucking case or anything, but like it's just rough out there, dude. I'm gonna keep it honest. It's so fucking rough out there, bro. That you just have to, like, if you're poor, you just have to get lucky, forehead. And people just, like, for whatever reason, they don't understand that for some reason. And it's just, it's always difficult to explain to a lot of older people these concepts. Because I have acknowledged before that, yeah, I'm lucky. I got lucky, okay? Like, totally. I don't disagree with that. But, like, for so many other people out there, it's so difficult and so tough for them to, like, be able to build any of that wealth or anything, that like honestly, like, just forehead getting lucky is like more often than not, like the only thing that a lot of people can do. It's sad, it's unfortunate this is the case.
never put any focus on that, never knew how to do it. I knew about like career fairs and like networking there, but I thought it was just limited to that. I didn't think there was anything outside of that I really needed to focus on. But yeah, it just, whichever job I was able to get my foot in the door with an interview just based on applying and hoping that a recruiter likes my resume, likes my experience, that's just what I relied on.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat as fucking Paula there, dude. Same shit, dude. I was just like, well, hopefully I can just somehow get fucking lucky, dude. Because honestly, like, I have got like no other fucking options in my fucking life. I'm basically fucking screwed, bro.
Having these connections doesn't just help you get a job or to keep a job. It means having more stability basically from the first minute of your career. Quote, before turning 30, nearly 1/3 of Americans will work at the same firm as a parent. In those jobs, these young adults earn almost 20% more than they otherwise would. And due to gender sorting, the tendency of men to work in higher paying professions than women, and existing wage gaps, white men from high-income families benefit from nepotism far more than poorer people, women, and minorities do. And interestingly, when you look at the data, you can see that this kind of chain of nepotism and connections actually also plays out in blue-collar fields. This is not to say that these advantages are on the same level as massive generational wealth, but it is another way in which who we know ultimately shapes almost everything about our lives. In fact, some data indicates that blue-collar careers like manufacturing have just as much, if not more, of a nepotism problem in their hiring practices than Fortune 500 companies. And these professional connections are still a kind of wealth because they limit opportunity for others regardless of qualifications. When literally about 1/3 of American workers under 30 have the job they currently have because a parent works there, it means that children born to parents who for whatever reason can't offer them that same pipeline are basically starting from several yards behind. And even if your parent figure isn't necessarily doing the hiring, perhaps their successful career will make it so that you, for example, can afford to do an unpaid internship for this company rather than having to work jobs that actually make money. Which goes back to our earlier point about wealth above all providing a smooth and gentle transition into adulthood. And the fact that theoretically we're all up for the same jobs or could all take the same internships is part of what makes the gaslighting so unbearable, because it's never acknowledged that, for example, only a certain portion of the population can work for free. So taking it back to Mel and Sophia, given that Sophia went to an Ivy League school and married someone from another elite family, it's very likely that her current job in the publishing house, a famously very competitive industry, was at least in part started by family connections, or at minimum the ability to work for free for a while. As someone who's published many books, I can tell you that the publishing world loves making people work for free. Whereas Mel, even if she was able to
I wonder why they like making people work for free. Haha, that's funny.
Work while also working multiple jobs. And when we were talking about Mel and Sophia's lives, we mentioned the fact that their housing situations, even at 40 years old, are drastically different. But this makes sense when you consider Chapter 4, how generational wealth ruins housing for the rest of us. Now, many of you sent me this story from New York Magazine recently, which talked all about generational wealth and the divide in places like New York City between people who can and can't afford to essentially be adults. And I can tell you firsthand, being a homeowner here in the city who did not come from wealth but was financially privileged enough to have a large down payment, that for the most part, getting into this housing market is just a matter of having people who can help you. And with housing becoming increasingly out of reach regardless of where you live in the country, this divide between who can and can't afford to buy even a very basic home is becoming worse each year, because more and more home buyers are depending on their parents to get their foot in the housing door, which we can assume means fewer people without family assistance even buying homes at all. As of 2023, quote, approximately.
Dude, it's also really bad up here in Canada. This isn't just like I mean, like, we're talking about the sort of like US here primarily speaking. Dude, it's also like a huge problem in Canada, dude. Like, there's a lot of other extenuating circumstances for why it is as bad as it is in Canada. You can, broadly speaking, talk a lot about the sort of the fact that there was not a lot of low income affordable housing that was, just generally speaking, not very, very often built That was a huge problem within that's a huge problem within Canada. One of the biggest reasons for as to why a lot of the time there was just like no housing, right? And we had huge migration waves as a result. So that being a compounding factor, basically, and sort of contributing to the problems that we're having with housing in this country, right? The huge migrant wave we had, the sort of huge the fact that we didn't have a lot of affordable housing. Fucking that dumbass Pierre Poilievre had a hand to play in that shit. That motherfucker, that little shit Pierre Poilievre, having a big hand to play in that shit was also like a huge fucking reason for us to why housing in Canada just got completely screwed over, dude.
38% of first-time home buyers under the age of 30 rely on either a cash gift from family members or an inheritance in order to afford a down payment on a new home purchase, illustrating the reliance that young home buyers have on family largely in the senior demographic. And it's not just here, by the way. In Canada, quote, since 2015, the share of first-time home buyers who received financial help from family members rose from 20% to 31%. And though the trend has leveled off in recent years, it has not declined. 40% of people requiring a gift from their parents to buy a home is literally insane. I just want to I know that our brains are completely cooked by late capitalism and we think all of this is normal. I mean, I know we don't think it's normal, but we've kind of just resigned ourselves to a kind of acceptance. But these
Yeah, literally, it's in the anecdote I showed earlier, quite literally, that was like one of my fucking friends who works as a fucking nurse. She had to get help from her fucking parents in order to be able to afford the home that she's currently in, or the apartment that she's currently in. That's right next to her work. It's a very nice apartment, a very, very good area.
numbers would be unthinkable even just a few decades ago in America. It used to be that the cost of homes were at least somewhat aligned with what one person was paid. Most people used to buy a home on one salary, and very few of those people worked white-collar jobs or had a college education. The fact that now close to half of people need to come from some kind of wealth in order to buy a home, we are so cooked. And this isn't even taking into account the huge rise of all cash offers, especially in super competitive housing markets like New York City. Quote, this April, 64% of Manhattan's home sales were all cash. That's almost double the number of large US metros, 39%, and a much larger difference than just 2 years ago. This trend is significantly a result of high mortgage rates, which incentivize homebuyers to use their savings rather than to borrow money from the bank. Also, low housing supply and high demand means that buyers are eager to stand out to those selling their properties, including by promising an immediate cash payment. And there are many reasons why this is extremely bad for housing markets, but one of them is that it ensures basically no one but the richest of the rich, or at least the most liquid, can actually buy homes. And for the vast majority of member adults, that huge payment is going to have to come from their parents. I actually know a few people whose parents gave them literally 7 figures to buy a home in New York City, which, shout out to them if my parents were going to write a check for $1 million+ to me. I mean, can I sit here and say that I have the political conviction, I guess, to be no, thank you, I'll struggle? I probably wouldn't. I'd probably take that money too, but it is just wild as hell to know you're just going to run for people.
7 fucking.
But that's the reality of a lot.
7 fucking figures, bro. That's insane, dude. Just to buy a fucking house, man. Bro, that's wild to have to fucking think about. I can't, yeah, I my parents are helping me, in the current apartment that I'm in, I have help from my parents. I wouldn't be fucking able to afford any of this shit, right? No fucking shot, dude. I can't fucking afford a mortgage. Hell fucking no. But, the idea that there's, people out there, it's yeah, I had a small loan of $1 million, in order to be able to get the house that I'm currently in. Is just it's just insane, dude. Really, it's just fucking nuts, man.
Out of New York City, especially here in Manhattan. And it's important to note that owning a home isn't just about getting into the home in terms of financial benefits. Because even though owning a home can come with a lot of potential drawbacks, especially if something goes wrong, it also confers huge perks. Quote, at the federal level, a substantial share of public subsidies for housing goes to homeowners through the federal home mortgage interest deduction at an annual cost of around $30 billion, roughly equal to expenditures on housing vouchers and orders of magnitude more than annual federal expenditures for public housing, homelessness, or the construction of new rentals. More than 90% of the value of the HMID goes to households earning over $100,000, and the program disproportionately services white families. Because of New York City's low homeownership rate, it also significantly underserves New York City's households. And as we mentioned, even just buying a home at all is insanely more expensive than it used to be. According to nationwide data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, between 1963 and 2023, when adjusted for inflation, the most expensive time to buy a home since 1963 was 2022. The average home price in the US was $552,600, whereas in 1963, the average house price in the US was just at $19,600, which adjusted for inflation would only be $196,000 in 2023. And the homeownership question also takes us back to something we mentioned earlier between Mel and Sophia, which is the difference in adulthood of having to take care of parents versus being taken care of by parents. For many lower income Americans, their home is often literally the only asset they have. For a lot of boomers who were able to get into the housing markets when they were much, much cheaper, they may have essentially nothing saved for retirement, they may have rising medical costs, they may have all kinds of financial burdens that will now fall to their adult children that wealthier children don't have to worry about, but they're also in a position where essentially their entire nest egg is tied up in their home. So for many Americans, keeping these housing costs exorbitantly expensive and ensuring that you're going to get paid many orders of magnitude over what you initially paid for your home is not just a huge win on the housing market, it's the difference between being able to retire.
Dude, the consequences of fucking NIMBYism being played out in real time, dude. Because this is exactly what, the problem is here, right? Fucking annoying, dumbass fucking NIMBYs being I don't want my housing to go up by, 3 extra fucking cents. Nah. And all these, dumbass boomers who constantly complain all the time about what the housing prices all the time in, in their HOA meetings or whatever the fuck. This is exactly how it happens, dude. Like, quite literally, it's crazy. This shit right here, playing out in real time.
Hire or not. So even if your parents are not one of the parents who need to be taken care of later in life, you're likely still impacted by the extent to which aging Americans are relying on a completely out of whack housing market in order to retire, which then trickles down to screw over their own children who can't buy a home. So essentially today, the only surefire way to be getting into a home, at least in a lot of markets, is to call up mom and dad and ask them to cut you a check. But if we reverse it and we look at another key difference between Mel and Sophia as 40-year-old women, we see that it is the cost of childcare, which brings us to our final chapter. When did childcare start costing as much as rent? Even anecdotally, as someone who does not want children, does not have them, I can see a massive difference in the people around me who have children who can rely on their parents for childcare or helping to pay for childcare versus the ones who can't. And while it is not the same thing as literally cutting a check for your child, being able to provide them with free childcare or at least heavily subsidized childcare in 2025 is essentially akin to a massive grant. Because whether or not you personally notice it, the cost of childcare has become completely unsustainable. And the pandemic has had a huge impact here, but the uncontrollably growing cost of childcare has been an issue for literally decades. According to an analysis from Business Insider, quote, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services considers childcare affordable if it costs less than 7% of a family's income. But nearly 2/3 of parents, including 95% of low-income parents, spend far more than that. Only 2% of counties in the entire analysis fell within the limit, meaning that by the government's own definition, childcare is unaffordable in 98% of counties across the country. And like everything else in
Jesus fucking Christ, bro. I don't know if it was that bad in Canada. Like, it was not great, but you know, a lot of like the child tax credits that happened in Canada as a result of like the Liberals' policies were certainly, I know that it certainly helped combat that. I know, broadly speaking, we know with what is it, the thing that was like talked about that cut child poverty in about half in America, that like those two fucking pieces of shit, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, just were just like, no, actually you will not be doing any of that stuff because we hate the sanctity of life. It's like, wow, you guys are fucking assholes. You know, it could have been a huge boon, all these the child tax credits for average Americans, but you know, those two motherfuckers had to just make it worse for everyone. That's cool. That's great. Fucking piece of shit.
our country, these costs of childcare wouldn't be such a big deal if wages had actually kept up with the growth of production. But spoiler alert, they didn't. And our politicians are so out of touch about this that they think that the answer for everyone should just be to ask mom and dad. According to, unfortunately, our Vice President, J.D. Vance, quote, one of the ways you might be able to relieve a little bit of pressure on people who are paying so much for daycare is maybe grandma and grandma want to help out a little more, or maybe there's an aunt or uncle who wants to help out a little more. If that happens, you relieve some of the pressure on all the resources that we're spending on daycare. Which again, even as
Bro, that's so fucking funny coming from J.D. Vance with his dumbass fucking puffed out little fucking cheek, that little baby faced dumbass little bitch. Him fucking saying that when he's a fucking acolyte of fucking Peter Thiel. That's real rich coming from you, you little shit.
someone who is not at all implicated personally in this scenario, I find to be so offensive and presumptuous. Because let's be very clear, in this country, grandma and grandpa, and especially aunt and uncle, and whoever the hell else you're thinking is going to pitch in, those people have to work. The people who are least likely to be able to afford childcare are the people who are also least likely to be able to depend on other families.
Dude, does JD Vance have, like, no idea how many, like, fucking Walmart greeters tend to be, like, 65 plus or some shit? Like, if you're American, you know about this fucking phenomenon, dude. Like, how many Walmart greeters tend to be, like, in their fucking 70s for some fucking reason? Oh, that's why. Because, you know, it's difficult. It's more difficult than ever to be able to fucking retire within America, dude. Because no one's got any fucking money. Because they're forced to have to pay off all these fucking debts all the time. And these fucking Republicans aren't gonna fucking do shit about it. Because they hate you. Same with the fucking Democrats. A lot of them also fucking hate you, too.
Family to just randomly work a full-time job for free for them. And as someone who used to be a full-time childcare professional, if you don't think that that is a job that someone is going to have to make huge sacrifices in order to do for you, if you're asking them to come regularly, you are delusional. And by the way, even if the solution were, hey guys,
well, I mean, to be fair to, I'm not sure who this person is. I mean, but the person from the financial diet. Let's be honest here. Conservatives actually do fucking unironically believe that. Because they want to, like, return with a V to, like, the fucking 50s. But for, like, whatever fucking reason, none of these fucking motherfuckers can seemingly recognize why at all the fucking 50s was as sort of, like, economically successful. It's because of the ideas behind Keynesian economics, you know. The idea that, like, the government should be able to pay for fucking services, be able to provide for fucking for the people, but well, you know, actually no, you should suffer as much as possible is what conservatives would, broadly speaking, say. You know, like I've said before, none of these motherfuckers care at all about, like, the sort of, like, efficaciousness at all of doing everything possible in order to bring better outcomes for society. No, they don't. They have their fucking bag. So, fuck it. Who gives a shit? They got their bag. They're good. Man, fuck it. Fuck you. Suffer. You're poor. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All that fucking jazz. We know. Trump/conservatives are pretty like, openly evil, but I really want to see then make it legal for people to sell organs and for rich people to buy them from poor people. Let's be honest here, AJ. No one would fucking want to do any of that shit, right? Why would rich people want to buy stuff from like the icky poors, right? You know what I'm saying here. Why buy anything from those icky, stinky poors? Like, fuck that shit, you know?
Live intergenerationally so you can help out. Spoiler alert, no one can afford to buy homes anymore, unless they already have generational wealth, in which case they probably aren't that worried about the cost of childcare. And for women like our friend Mel, who is the highest earner in her family and still stretched extremely thin, not only is leaning on well-off family members to pitch in for free, not an option, she's having to lean in for them.
And so currently in my situation, I'm not like supporting them in a major way. I send my mom some money per month just to make sure that she has enough to take care of my grandma, just because there's a lot of expenses in that. And my mom's already retired, so that check isn't that large. So just to offset some costs, I send some money per month. But again, it's nothing major, maybe $100 or $200 a month. But yeah, I did keep in mind just whenever I was thinking about what career I wanted to get, what job I had throughout education, that eventually I wanted to set my mind on if my parents needed support, I'd be able to support them.
And not to mention, many Americans don't even live in close proximity to family members, especially people like Mel, who moved to places like New York for work opportunities. And of course, the importance of building community and having a village is crucial. And maybe in his heart of hearts, that's what JD believes he was getting at, but I doubt it. I cannot trust a man who does his eyeliner like that. But when your village is already struggling to take care of themselves, they cannot be the structurally sound foundation that you need. And if you're thinking, well, childcare is a strain, but it's just a couple years and then they can go to public school, ignoring the fact that public school, depending on where you live in this country, is a vastly different experience, and that is also tied to the local wealth in the area that school is found. Daycare and preschool.
Yeah, dude, the idea that fucking public school is like, bro, just like get lucky forehead in like fucking public school, bro. Like, what do you mean? Like, if the property taxes are like complete dog shit, like that school is gonna have like no funding and it's gonna be a fucking just rank fucking disaster, dude. Like, the fucking like pretentiousness that a bunch of these like motherfuckers have all the time is just, it's so fucking annoying, dude.
Will have a huge impact on the rest of your child's trajectory. So even those very first years are a part of the generational wealth pipeline. Preschool attendance, whether public or private, has been shown to increase a child's chances of graduating high school on time and attending college. And meta-analyses of evidence across decades of evaluation research indicate with confidence that preschool programs have a substantial impact on early learning and development. Positive impacts on children's development include improved language, literacy, math, social, and emotional outcomes, as well as physical health. And research also shows that positive effects extend to dual language learner children and children with special needs. And early childhood education is crucial for long-term success, which is why public programs like New York City's free 3K and pre-K are so important, because they give kids access to this education regardless of their parents' socioeconomic status. And we mentioned this before, but it's worth reiterating, the flip side of this, of not being able to afford childcare, is having to afford caring for your parents, which is only a burden on people in this country who don't come from generational wealth. Basically, take any group of friends in any city and you're gonna have like half of them who are like, wow, I really hope my parents don't like fall down when they're shoveling snow or something, because if literally anything goes wrong, then I'm completely screwed financially, because they don't even have enough money to retire, let alone take care of themselves if they're injured, let alone deal with being disabled, and I'm already going to have to subsidize their living costs for the foreseeable future, even if they do retire with quote unquote full health. And the other half were like, I hope my parents fall when they're shoveling snow so I can finally get my inheritance. I'm kidding, they're probably not thinking that, but they are thinking, can't wait till mom and dad retire so we can go to like Italy more and shit. I don't know. I feel like I see people on my social media feeds whose parents are like traveling to Europe all the time and taking the whole family, and I'm just like, is that what life is like for boomers in parts of this country? Like, unimaginable. Anyway, because in all seriousness, for people without generational wealth and for people like Mel who carry a lot of responsibility for their families, it is not a question of being taken care of by their parents, it's a question of taking care of their parents or elder relatives at a certain point in their lives. Quote, according to a MetLife study, adult child caregivers in the US suffer a cumulative loss of nearly $3 trillion in earnings. For sons, the average in total lost income, including wages, pension, and social.
That's a crazy amount of fucking money, dude. $3 trillion fucking dollars, bro. But I mean, you know, it's the whole fucking the meme and everything, dude, right? Like, it's just unfortunate that like a lot of people just seemingly will never fucking understand about like the struggles about being fucking poor, dude. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just fucking crazy. Like, it's so fucking obvious and so simple to see that, like, dude, like, it should be fucking obvious that it's rough out there, man. And there's a lot of complicated reasonings for as to why it is as rough as it is out there, right? Like, let's not be fucking silly about this. But, I don't know. For, like, a lot of other people, it's just, like, they just don't get it. No one seems to fucking get it. But, like, you know, suffer. You must suffer for being poor. That's just how it is in fucking America. You know, we love America, don't we, folks?
Social Security is $283,716 per person. And the news is even worse for daughters, who lose an average of $324,044 in total earnings as a result of their caregiving responsibilities. $325,000 is crazy, you guys. These poor women. Florence Pugh was right in Low Women. Marriage is an economic proposition.
Don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is.
Marry someone who can help you take care of your parents. Now, as with most of these questions of there's something really wrong in our economy and what can we do to fix it, the answer is going to come down to policy. We need reform around our inheritance tax, around the marginal tax rates of the wealthiest in this country. We need to raise wages. We need to strengthen Social Security. We need to reduce the cost of childcare, and many more things than that, unfortunately. We could have had it all with Bernie.
True.
Rolling the D. And we'll link you guys to a ton of resources in the description.
Bernie! What could have been? What could have been? He would have won, dude. I'm just saying. Bernard Sanders, he would have won. Let's keep it $1.50. He would have won.
you want to start helping move in the right direction on any of those fronts. Because listen, assuming nothing goes catastrophically wrong, and at this point who knows, we will eventually have midterms. And in the meantime, we have to keep fighting for the policy changes that we need to fix some of these structural issues and to make it very clear that fake economic populism backed by culture war nonsense is not a real replacement for actual economic reform. Because not all things were better in, for example, the 1950s. As a woman, as an LGBT person, a person of color, as basically anyone who wasn't a white man, there were clearly many ways in which we were found lacking, let's say, as a society in the 1950s. But economically, for the working and middle class, a lot was better. And there can be a future with a much more inclusive and diverse and robust middle class. It's not a question of an imagined future, it's a question of recreating things we've already done when we were a much less productive, efficient, and advanced society. But
yeah, but the problem is like, yeah, the conservatives don't give a shit about any of that stuff, right? Because, like, they broadly speaking just hate the concept of, like, Keynesian economics. Because that's, like, if we want to talk about the most, like, socially sort of successful time in all of, like, fucking human history in terms of, like, economics or whatever, it was during Keynesianism, right? It was Keynesian economics that fucking did that shit. Nothing like that conservatives fucking did. Like, that's why it was as broadly successful as it was. But, like, you know, meh. Suffer. One must suffer instead. This is like the sort of, like, I don't know, not proposition, the sort of position that we sort of find ourselves stuck in now.
in the meantime, while we are fighting the good fight, the most important thing we can do for our day-to-day mental health is to detach ourselves from this matrix that convinces us that generational wealth is normal to play out in the way it does, that there's something wrong with us for not being able to achieve the same milestones when we had none of the same resources to get there, or that we shouldn't be immensely proud of ourselves as children who did not come from those kinds of backgrounds or have those advantages for having gotten where we are in the first place.
Not having generational wealth was not something hugely impactful to me because I had kind of a warped definition of it until very recently. My warped definition was that generational wealth means you have a trust fund, means that having a job or career is like a fun side gig for you that you don't have to have. It's all gravy, and really you're just cruising through life, which is not, it's a part of that definition, but it's definitely not all encompassing. So when I thought about that lifestyle, it was similar to thinking about what would happen if I won the lottery. It was an idea that's fun to dream about and brainstorm, you know, all the cool things that you could do if money was not an object, but it was almost just an exercise in futility. Eventually now, growing into it, having more conversations with my friends about what generational wealth really could be beyond that limited scope of definition, it's a lot more nuanced, I would say. So being able to say my upbringing without generational wealth, even in the sense of financial stability and comfort, knowledge that if I do hit a large financial pitfall and I need support, then I could have someone to lean on. I would say that is also somewhat in, you know, on the spectrum of the definition of generational wealth. Growing up, I feel like it was very stable and great, but the economy and upbringing was so different than what I'm seeing now that if I had an household income similar to my parents today, I would not be able to have a house to support 3 kids and make sure they get all of the things that I received as a child. So that is a little bit worrisome because now it's a lot of pressure to find a career and keep up with a career a lot better than my parents in order to keep it the same, in order to stay middle class.
Dude, and none of these like fucking boomers ever seem like, you try to reason with them and be like, okay, here's like all the problems and like here's how like difficult and tough that it is. And like for whatever reason, they just never get it, dude. They never get it. No matter how many times they explain, they just refuse to just understand. And it's just like, it's the most frustrating nonsense ever, dude. It's just like, it's like, why do you not understand, dude? Like, why are you making this, like, so much more difficult than it needs to be, bro? Like, why? It just becomes, like, supremely frustrating.
In order to have similar happiness and, you know, opportunities for myself and my kids. So there is a lot more pressure now to maintain or do better than. And it's sometimes disheartening when you think that you're putting in a lot of effort and pursuing all of kind of hard work and career fields just so that you can have the same amount of kind of lifestyle and effort that you were receiving as a kid.
We are planning to have children in the future in a few years, and it would definitely, their upbringing would definitely look different. My jobs actually started off in like higher education, and so now I have an understanding of that system that, you know, I didn't have growing up. And one of the things that I've been trying to save up for and really put our focus on is once we get to the point where we have children, I'd be able to spend more time with children, whether that means taking time off of work or just switching to part-time and being more involved in like the opportunities that they can find. And also one of the things, and this is something that my mom did when we were little, like starting at like 4 or 5 years old, she'd always, whenever we go like grocery shopping or like any type of shopping, she'd always give us like this tiny amount of money to be like, okay, like whatever you want, like budget, you have $5, think about how much it costs,
Learn how to budget for it.
And like from a very early age, she did instill a knowledge of what spending is into us, and that's something that I would definitely want to continue, but also now include the financial education I've gotten now of like investing, making sure like how we're saving up for big purchases and just those types of habits, starting them off early on with that. So that would be like a huge difference for them. And just thinking about, you know, even college opportunities, like there's trades as well. There's not like, there's other avenues of generating wealth that we didn't know about. That's something that I would want my children to have the opportunity to learn about and grow in.
Because when you think about how uneven the playing field is, like for example, a college education putting one person into a lifetime's worth of debt versus barely making a dent in another person's bank account, and how little it gets talked about, people without generational wealth are made to feel like they're the outliers in this situation. I highly recommend the trust fund episode of Dairy Girls on this subject.
Just step into your trust fund. I do it all the time. I did not know about this. Did you know about this? Go to the
Shout out Dairy Girls. But in reality, the vast majority of Americans do not have access to these things. It's just not
wealth.
those Americans who are controlling our narratives, our politics, and our media. So even if the elite institutions and the people who populate and control them are not going to stop gaslighting anytime soon, we can stop gaslighting ourselves by thinking that generational wealth isn't, I'm going to be generous and say 82 to 83% of the answer of where adults find themselves. Anyway, stay curious, stay angry, but definitely stay moving forward, and I'll see you back here next month. Bye, guys.
Nice. It's a pretty good video overall. A lot of the points here pretty much hit on the head. Yeah, like, It's just unfortunate that, like, America, broadly speaking, has been, I would say, like, captured overall by, like, generational wealth. I don't think that's, like, hyperbolic or, like, ridiculous to say in particular, right? Like, and we've seen the studies. We know, like, what exactly is going on here. There's a lot of things to say about, like, in particular, I think, like, a perfect sort of, like, supplementary sort of piece would be, like, from Deleuze and Guattari, the postscripts on the societies of control, where, broadly speaking, like, society is in such a way where it'll immediately understand and you will already know how you can be segmented throughout society based on, like, just performances in school and academia and, like, a lot of other, like, sort of, like, other socioeconomic strata. And it's just unfortunate, dude. Like, that this is, like, sort of the byproducts of, like, late stage capitalism, right? Like, you know, standard fucking lefty spiel here. Yeah, I know, blah blah blah. You look at the soy fucking lefty talking about capitalism yet again. But this is, like, the sort of byproduct, right? Like, it becomes a lot harder for people to earn meritocratically without, like, the state having to step in to try to do something about it. More and more power and wealth will be continually concentrated to a smaller and smaller, like, few people, and it's going to only get way more tougher and way harder to fucking be able to build those, like, vestiges of, like, wealth and success that is expected of, like, society is expecting from you. Like, that's the sort of problem that's mostly being, like, hit here. It's just unfortunate that we kind of, like, find ourselves in this position where it's just like, yeah, dude, you know, get owned. You weren't born in money, haha, sucks to suck. But I always like seeing it from, like, the arguments that these conservatives try to be like, where it's just like, yeah, dude, like, what do you mean? You can't, like, dip into, like, your rich parents' like, trust fund or anything? You don't have, like, any people to sort of, like, go to or something? It's like, well, for most people, no. Like, they're just fucked and they can't do anything and they're just, like, permanently stuck. It is what it is. That's the current society that we find ourselves in. Or you just have to get, like, lucky somehow. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know. Like, broadly speaking, we know exactly the solutions to problems like this. It's taxing the wealthy, a wealth tax, like top marginal tax rates. Like, when was the period of most economic success recorded throughout human history? It was the post-World War II era under the New Deal and the broader ideas of Keynesian economics, with, like, top marginal tax rates on the wealthiest of people of 90+%. And for, like, whatever reason, these are, like, concepts that, like, have been forgotten now or something. It's just sad and silly that, like, broadly speaking, no one seems to, like, understand any of this stuff anymore. It's just like, it's like something that's been, like, lost to time or something. Anywho, not really much else to say about this besides, like, you know, because you can still crawl out of this, right? There are solutions to these problems, and that is taxing the shit out of wealthy people. That's what needs to happen in order to be able to fix these problems. They need to be taxed. They need to, you know, there has to be, like, wealth redistribution. And broadly speaking, these are policies that are very popular amongst, like, a majority of people in America. But, you know, we have, like, dumbasses like Donald Trump saying, like, well, if we tax the millionaires and the billionaires, they're gonna leave. They're just gonna leave. They're not gonna be here anymore. They're not gonna want to do it. Which is complete nonsense. It should pretty much tell you exactly, like, who Congress, broadly speaking, is for. It's not for the constituent. It's for the wealthy. Like, and that's not really, like, ridiculous or, like, hyperbolic to say. Like, this has been studied by, like, Princeton University, that most outcomes are that are most beneficial to the wealthy. We know this, and broadly speaking, we know what the solutions to these problems are. It's tax the fuck out of them, because that's what needs to happen. You want any changes in this? Wealthy people, well, it's time for them to lose some of their money.